Hello, this is Jamie of the Druid Diaries. I want to speak about Druids and activism, especially environmental activism. I believe this is a personal choice. It is not a choice by any one Druid to then therefore represent the entire Druid community by taking part or leading any form of activism in this area, or even something like human rights as another example. We are individuals and we are an eclectic group. We have a large range of different beliefs. I myself do not really identify completely as a Druid, as I feel I have so much to learn, but I also have things to offer, as do we all. So I'm looking at this more in terms of the practice and path of Druidry. Is it something that is, characteristic of Druids? And I would say probably not characteristic of the majority, because I think that we are still a very modest group, and it's not that being an activist is not being modest. I think it's an act of great conviction and to much degree of personal sacrifice, because one has to miss work or like take a sick day or take holiday time or commit time outside of work to, let's say, letter writing, doing videos, or fundraising, that kind of thing. It does take a good degree of sacrifice to be a real social activist, a purveyor of change. So I think that's a huge commitment upon any person who does become an activist, let's say an environmental activist. They are also often risking personal well-being, and that isn't something that is done lightly. It's often done with a sense of passion and good-heartedness that's very noble. However, it's not a statement of policy per se. A variety of different groups, groves, organizations, I'm sure, they have looked at whether or not to take that step. Some have, and I think that's a really important move, but it's been done with great thought and consideration, and I believe to a large a large degree, some consensus or degree of it has to have been arrived at. Sorry, I have my door open without a screen, and there's a fly buzzing around in here. However, he's on his own. I believe that it is something that absolutely rings true at the core of Druidry, of the Druid beliefs, and that anyone who incorporates reverence for nature cannot avoid the issues when it comes to the environment. So, can you be a Druid and not be concerned about environmental issues? I find that a little bit hard to believe. And I think one would have to live in quite a degree of isolation from sort of global monitoring on the situation and the science and the experiences of people in other countries to ignore that. If you're sitting in the middle of a beautiful forest that doesn't appear on the surface to be affected by these things that are happening, then yes, I can see perhaps how some individuals might miss the boat on this. However, if you are really in tune with nature, somehow, somewhere deep in your soul, I believe you're going to feel it. You're going to feel something is wrong. You may not be able to identify it, you may not have the science on it, but you're going to feel it. I know when I was very young, I actually received dreams about acid rain, a warning before it came into the news. So I take this kind of intuitiveness very seriously. In my dream, was shown a painting, and it was a painting of a duck that was swimming, and the artist had done the water section so that you could see the feet and the underbelly of the duck as skeletal, and it was a reference to the acidity in the water. And at that time in central Canada, we were having a lot of die down from the top down due to acid rain. And eventually I saw that painting, and that showed me that I actually had some kind of intuitive connection, and that either my brain was speaking to me, in imageries that I would pick up on something, going on. I just, I have an interest in Jung. I had an interest in Jung from a very young age, and I do believe there is something akin to a collective unconscious or some other kind of deeper language that connects us all. It isn't something we necessarily can control. Some believe they can, some believe it's not. You're getting into ideas about shamanism and clairvoyance, and that actually relates more to the ovate, the vate sort of segment of study in Druidry. And I think that's a really important study. And I think it's one that's very relevant here. But we're talking more about environmental activism. How can people involved in Druidry not take it upon themselves to have some sense of responsibility to turn things right? However they may do that is up to them. It's up to their groves, their organizations. Myself, I study the plants in my immediate area. I make it a point to understand what's going on with the pollinators here. I look at the pollution issues in my local community. I make sure that I am aware globally of as many things that I can cope with. I find, it's good to take on maybe a special thing that you are particularly concerned of. Mine is plastic pollution. And how do we, as a society, get away from using so much petroleum plastic? I'm not saying to eliminate it completely, but to reduce the use of it dramatically and use alternative plastics, plant-based plastics that, can just degrade or compost without any kind of harmful microscopic residue. I think, taking little projects like that as individuals in Druidry, that's showing some kind of awareness and commitment and sharing knowledge, not denying, but being investigative. And if someone says to you, oh, wow, the winter was barely there, or the winter was really fierce, I don't understand this global warming. Well, make it your business to investigate the science and start to understand how oceans and the tiny little changes in ocean temperature and affect ocean currents and affect other life in the ocean, like the Great Barrier Reef, tiny little microscopic beings in there, affected by this tiny little shift in temperature. They die off, and boom, we lose this historic, magnificent, thriving coral reef. It's just, a World Heritage Site, and another essential kind of part of the overall ecosystems on this planet. The word essential may have been used a little loosely there, but it was a treasure. The Great Barrier Reef in Australia was a treasure. And whether or not it bounces back, that is just, it's not really acceptable to be trashing nature like that. And especially if we're Druids, we need to be aware of what's going on. Chopping down almost an entire old growth forest before you even really understand what that forest is doing, that you don't understand its oxygen producing qualities, how it, creates sanctuary for multitudes of plants and other life forms to grow. It's when you don't understand something, it's not a good idea to just go destroying it. I would hope that as a Druid community, whether we're studying to be Druids or we're Druids who are studying for life, it's important to be role models of people who are open to knowledge and who are always striving to learn more and to strive for truth and to really get a good grip on situations and to be sharers, studiers and sharers. I am not, as I said, I'm not a botanist, but I can learn a lot about botany, and I can learn from a lot of people around me, and I can encourage people, let's say, involved in permaculture and applaud their efforts, even if I can't do a permaculture project. And I think that's what being a Druid is all about, is you don't necessarily have to be a specialist in all of these areas, but you can have this kind of social concern, this kind of social empathy, and be bearers of broad knowledge that can be applicable, and to be people who make reasoned choices and that are not rash. And it may not seem like that at times, but because people are human, and sometimes Druids are going to be very passionate about things. But that's my thought of the day on Druids and activism and the environment. We cannot be those who worship as a part of nature without caring and being guardians and helpers in that path. Thank you.